One of our viewers left us this message. I've read that the light and dark areas should be balanced. Do you agree with this? Could you give some pointers on how to do this? Well, we'll try to shed a little light on that one. Alright, think about it like this. We usually will have light and shadow in whatever we're looking at. Or we'll have nothing if it's totally dark, or maybe a snowstorm, you won't see any of that. But let's say wherever you are, there's a light source and you've got light and shadow. Well, let's try balancing by doing this sort of thing, where we average out all those degrees of shadow, and this would refer to the value scale. Within the value scale, the value scale recognizes various degrees of shadow and various degrees of light. So we have here in this photograph of these cows, you see this area, all this area right here is in shadow, but you see that there are various degrees of shadow. In some places the shadow is much darker than it is in other places. So that's how we get our degrees of value, depending upon just how much or to what degree something is in light and shadow. Well, if we want to balance that, really all we have to do, most of what we have to do, is just be true to nature. And so here's what I've found is a really good way to do that. All right, let's look at this little chart I've created for you here. If you think of everything that's in shadow as one average value, just call it an average shadow value. Everything that's in shadow, consider that a dark. Then think of everything that is not in shadow, or that's in light, regardless of what degree of light it's in. If there's light striking it, in other words, if it's not turned away from the light, think about all that as an average light. And if you do that, you can develop a little diagram or a little pattern, and you know what I'm going to say now if you're used to studying with me, the No-10. The No-10 gives us that pattern of light and shadow as we see it, and it will show the light and shadow in balance according to how the light source is hitting things. So the one thing that we want to guard against when we're dealing with light and shadow, and we always are when we're painting, the one thing we want to guard against is having a 50-50 distribution. We don't want there to be an equal amount of light and an equal amount of shadow, because then it's ambiguous. So the one thing that you can look for when you're setting up your designs or your compositions is that you have anything but a 50-50 distribution. So it depends on the subject. That could be 40-60, or it could be 30-70, or it could be 80-20 in any direction, one or the other. 80-20 dark, 80 dark, 20 light, or 80 light, 20 dark, that sort of thing. Well, I want to show you a little exercise here. Now, what I found with my students when I first introduced No-10, they have trouble telling or reading shadow. So if you're one of those people who has trouble reading shadow, I want to show you a little exercise that you can do that will help you get the sense of how to read what's in shadow. And then that will help you, I hope, help you to, give you a tool to see just how the design, or how the pattern of light and shadow fall, to give you the kind of balance that we need in order to have a good painting. All right, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take away this photo. And you see what I've done. You don't see what I've done. There we go. I've taken the color away. Now by taking the color away, now we have the distribution of lights and darks. And we can because we're not distracted by color, we can more easily read the pattern of lights and darks. Now, if you have a computer and a printer, you can do this. So what you would need to do, if you have a computer that has some sort of editing software, photo editing software, you'll be able to take the color away. Just put it into a light and dark mode, and then print it, and then do the exercise. Now, this is an exercise that is to teach you how to read where the shadows are. Or you could say read where the lights are. So what you would need then is a black and white photograph of whatever your subject is, some sort of a marker, and if you have, and this is just a part of the exercise, if you have some sort of a pastel pencil or white charcoal pencil, or even just gesso would do this, you need some way to work with the light. But I'm going to show you about the shadow first. Now I'm not going to work on this whole thing. I'm going to show you how to do it, which is my mode, as you know. I'm going to show you how to do it, and then you can try this exercise and then go to the next step of doing the exercise on just drawing paper without the image and see what kind of payoff you get. So what we can do now is, I'm just going to take this single cow and I'm going to start just putting black over everything that is in shadow. This will help you read shadow, and I'll show you why this might be helpful later. Or you see this area right in here that is in shadow. So I'll just take my marker and I'll just throw all that into a single value. Now this is obviously in shadow because it's so dark. People get confused though when they get to little areas like this, because they will think that is light. That little part right there is light. It's reflected light in a shadow area, so that belongs in shadow. Now we know the light is shining on this side, so it goes to it is reasonable that everything's on this side is in shadow. And this is another thing that confuses people when they see something like this right here. They say, well, that's in light. No, it's in shadow. It's reflected light. So reflected light belongs in the shadow area. So you would throw that in shadow. You see, that would be part of reading the shadow. And also help part of the balance, because if you define that at the value of light, it's going to jump out as if it doesn't belong. So you would just continue in this way, moving down, and if you have trouble, you see this right here, there's another place that's reflected light that belongs in shadow. This is turning away from light. You can see right here that all this is turning away from light. Even this, which is lighter, it's all turning away from light. Now this over here is obviously in shadow, all this part right in here. But you'll get confused when you get to this area right here where we have transition. So there are certain values, middle value areas, this right in here, where you might say, well, is it in light or is it in shadow? Well, it's moving from light into shadow. So you can sort of just guess at a place when it's moving away from light and falling into shadow. All right, we've got a shadow right here. This is called a cast shadow. There are two kinds of shadow, two major kinds of shadow. This right here. So the light is behind there somewhere. Behind in this direction, obviously, because these ears are in shadow, but what's behind the ears is in light. So if you can identify where the light source is, that will help you to identify shadow. So there's a note, wherever the light's located, it's hitting right here, but it's not hitting right here. So this is in shadow. Now, the next obvious question that someone's going to ask is, well, what if it's a black cow? It won't matter. A black cow is going to have light, wherever the light's hitting it, that light's going to be in the light value range. So if the light's hitting strong, now these are dark cows, but look at the value portion, how strong the light's hitting. So that light is going to fall right in here somewhere if the object or the subject is black or very, very dark. That's hard for a lot of people to believe, just as hard for people to believe that the shadow is on something white and it's actually falling in the dark range. But see, that's the reason it's a good idea to train your eyes to know where the light source is and what falls in shadow. So I won't go on extensively on this. I want to do just enough of this sort of thing to show you, or give you a way to think about this and locate the areas that are in shadow. And I'll just move around. Now see, this little part right here is sticking out and catching some light. That too is a clue as to where the light source is located. So it's not over here enough to shine in this area. It's over here somewhere, maybe about right here, enough for this little part to catch light, but the rest of this is in shadow. So that's the way you talk to yourself. So this part, that's a plane that's turning away. This part of the cow's shoulder, that's a part that is turning away from light, therefore getting shadow. And then this part is turning more towards the light, therefore not getting in shadow. Not getting shadow. You see right down in here, this all falls into shadow, falls into shadow, in shadow, in shadow. And that's what I've learned to the language, is say in shadow, in shadow, in shadow, and so on. So you continue, you would continue that process. Now the stuff behind here counts too. This obviously is something vertical, foliage that's vertical, that's in a position so that it's falling into shadow. So that all this stuff back here also falls into shadow. So this is the way the exercise goes, and I'm not going to continue because I think you have the idea now, and so anything I do beyond that much of showing you how to do this would be sort of redundant. But I want to show you the other side of it too in order to make the whole thing complete. I'll just go on down and catch. This is all in shadow. This is a cast shadow right here. So we throw all that into a cast shadow, except where the grass is poking up enough to catch light. This is a cast shadow. This is a cast shadow. This is a cast shadow. This is a cast shadow coming from another cow. All those shadows are count. So you look for the cast shadows, the ones that are caused because something is blocking from the light, and the other shadows are called form shadows. Those are the shadows that are on the other side of light on any image. So we continue like that, and then we go here. Oh, you see, right here is a good place. This is a plane. You see how this goes. This plane of the cow's belly comes this way. That's one plane. This way, that's another plane, and those are in the direction of the light. Somehow the light is catching. Then they start turning away. There's another plane that turns away here, and as it turns away from the light, and therefore into a form shadow. Same thing is going on with its hind leg right here. See, we have the plane right here that catches you in a little bit. That's called edge light, where the light is obviously behind this plane and then turning towards us. So it wouldn't hurt along with this to be able to identify the planes of anything, especially anything that's round, so that you can determine what is actually in shadow. And keep in mind that anytime you see reflected light, that belongs to the shadow. So that develops a pattern for you. The next step of that, and I think do both steps to understand what we mean by the pattern, and therefore to help you see the balance. So, and again, I'm not going to do the whole thing, just enough to show you. The next step is to take something white and throw all that is left, all that's not in shadow, all that is receiving light, or you should say maybe receiving direct light, make all that one value. That's the idea here, is to have an average value for studying this stuff, create an average value of everything that's in shadow, call that an average shadow value, and then to create another average value for everything that's in light, that's being hit by light, from this degree of value right here all the way over there. All of that falls into that single light value. So then we can see, if we do something this way, see that eye falls into shadow, but then the areas around, the planes around the eye, so the eye dips in. So the planes around the eye are catching light. Okay, now here, there is an area, there's an area I missed. So I'll go back and throw that in the shadow. That is, there's some planes right there turning away from the light, are therefore in shadow. And then we have kind of a low light right here. That plane is turning away just enough, but it's still receiving some of that light. So if you throw this into two values, then you get down to what we call the value distribution. How the value pattern is being distributed, and you can determine by that what kind of balance you have. All right, so we'll just go through the areas in light and throw those. This is low light, planes catching the shadow back there, planes catching light, planes being struck by light, being hit by light, are those that would fall into this light area. Planes turning away from light are going to fall into shadow. So you see now you begin to have that single value, that single average shadow or average light value. And we'd go into all these areas in here. And also the negative space, the space around the object that's receiving light, where the light is hitting. You see that throws that all into a single average light. And so all this in here, all this is a single average light. Now you might recognize as all this falls into place, you might recognize that we have a no-tan. So the exercise, this particular exercise, is simply to help train your eye to see these things. And once you are confident that you're always able to see what's in light and what's in shadow with no problem, then you begin to do these, and you've seen in other videos where I've worked little no-tans, especially in my sketchbooks, when I've shown you sketchbook work, where I've worked these little no-tan patterns, and this is exactly how I did it, except I didn't have a black and white image underneath. I was looking straight at the subject, and that's what you want to learn how to do, is to look straight at the subject. Make yourself a little preliminary drawing so you can place your images, and then just define those areas, or just put flat shapes, flat dark shapes into those areas that are in shadow, and there you have it. Now, let's get this much. I'm just going to assume that we forget that cow's back there all day. We call that in shadow. Now you can see. Now, the distribution, that looks like, as it turns out, that looks like maybe just perhaps about a 60% light and maybe 40%, or maybe 60, maybe, I can't do math very well, 55, 45, something like that. The thing is, it doesn't feel to me, it doesn't feel to me that it's equal. Now what if it were equal? What if I look at it and I say, okay, that seems like an equal amount of light and dark? Well, then you can go in and reposition the sunlight. So you could say, all right, or you could reposition in any direction. You could say, all right, the sun is lower. If you want it to be more dark, you could say the sun is lower, and so the sun being lower, then that would be more of this would be in shadow, and then you can begin to add. You have to tell yourself where that sun is, but if the sun's falling lower over here, then all these planes will be turning into shadow. And see, by doing that, we change the distribution or the balancing of the light. This too probably, it maybe begin to receive a little bit of black light or edge light, as we call it. Let's see, how does that distribution work? So you see what happens there, it changes, of course I haven't gone through the whole thing, but it changes the character of the whole thing. Okay, if the sun were lower, this would be, a little bit of that would be falling more into shadow. Let's see, perhaps, well this wouldn't, but this over here would probably throw a little bit more in the shadow. You see, you can still see cow in there, and it still makes sense. Certainly this would fall more into shadow, this area right here. So then now we change the distribution. Now the amount of dark is beginning to feel maybe more dark than light. We could change, there would be a longer cast shadow right here if the sun were lower, and so on. Maybe it's a fatter cow right here. Let's see. All right. So that gives you an idea of how you could work this. First of all, just work with just what's there, just the light and the shadow that's there, in order to teach yourself, if you don't already know how to do this, but in order to teach yourself how to read shadow and shadow values and throw them into a single flat shape, and how to read those areas that are not in shadow. So work with this, and I think you'll find it makes it much easier to understand that whole problem of being able to balance your lights and darks. Be sure and view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section, and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianeMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.